We don't all age the same. And when you look at using chronological age to define old age, and for a long time it was 65 in Canada because that's when the old age pension took effect in full. Or you define it as 60 or you define it as 70, it doesn't really matter. You have several decades defining older adults. Well, you take any age grouping that's 20 or 30 or 35 years in breadth, and just imagine the differences that you're going to find amongst people. So heterogeneity is huge. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time on is trying to debunk the negative stereotype of age and the ageism that still exists in society. Not everyone who is old is frail, but it is true that the older we get, our physical health declines. But the inside, whether you call it the soul or the internal or whatever you want to call it, the heart, continues to evolve. But so often in society we judge the external. So if someone's skin is very wrinkled and they're hunched over and they aren't walking quite as well or whatever, we make a judgment about who they are as people in here. So it's trying to debunk a lot of that ageism.
And really, like, ageism itself is one of the last isms that's so ingrained in our language.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the really interesting thing about it, is that there's so much of this emphasis on youthfulness and vitality and whatever we associate with that, and instead of how do we look at, you know, vitality at any age and what does that mean?
Yeah.
And the stories that we tell about ourselves are some of the most important aspect of that, you know, that internalized, is it internalized shame, or is it really empowering to be like, oh yeah, like at any point in my life, like people are made up of stories, and it's the stories that I choose to tell about myself.
Exactly, I can change the narrative.
Mm-hmm. I think so often when we talk about aging, we say, you know, that you've developed who you are, and then you stay the same, and you just happen to be in an aging body. But really, like, there's so many things that change throughout your life. So I worked with the Victoria Target Theatre Society, which is a seniors-based theatre company where it's all older adults, and they create theatre with, by, and for older adults.
What a great concept.
They're amazing. They are doing applied theatre work, and a lot of the time they haven't necessarily called it that, but they're being like, you know, there are a lot of topics that, are facing older adults, and we're older adults ourselves. We're the best ones to tell these stories. So Target Theatre, and then we worked at Victoria High School. We met there once a week for about 4 months. And from that, those insights about life stories and that intergenerational connection, and how, you know, it's not necessarily a linear thing, it's how the stories that you hear from older adults about their own youth, and then the youth considering how that's going to affect their life now and over the years, has been amazing. So those first few months was really key about creating that safe environment of saying, you know, we're going to bring in film, we're going to bring in music and newspaper articles and all these different things, so we can talk about sexuality and talk about what that means at any age, but without getting too personal. I think one of the main things that was amazing was talking about, again, gender identity and orientation.
Yeah.
And one of the students was explaining to one of the older adult collaborators, there's at least a 50-year difference between the two of them, and the student is explaining that they're pansexual and that their pronouns are they, and what that means for them. And this older adult collaborator being like, that just wasn't even an option when I was young. It's like, that was a thing? He was like, that sounds amazing. Like, okay, like, sure. Like, pansexual sounds so much more freeing. Like, what?
The other point to know is that I'm not a psychologist, and we have all these different types of memory, I'm told. And that short-term memory loss is very common as we age. So the term senior's moment, right? I've had a senior's moment. Because you have seniors moments does not mean you're getting dementia. Because people get really scared, right? And I understand that.
Yeah.
So when they talk about this tsunami overtaking us, it makes it sound like everyone gets dementia. Well, they don't. It is true that the older you get, and the older you get in old age, you're more likely to get dementia. But for those, say, 65 and over, it's around 8%. Well, turn the stat around. It means at least 90% of us are not going to get dementia. Now, if you look at those 80 and over, the figures vary, so anywhere between 20 and 30% of us will get dementia.
Oh, that's dramatic.
So that's high, and it's worrisome, but it still means that 70 to 80% of us don't get dementia.
Let's go into that.
You know, it sort of depends on how you look. But it's absolutely not to minimize the importance of this disease, not only for people who get it, but also for their family members and their loved ones. I mean, clearly it's a terrible, terrible illness.
We watched Coco the other day, and I'm like sobbing at the end of the film, you know, when little Miguel plays the song. And of course, you know, I had a mom with dementia, so that film was just so smart. How many layers that it hits, you know, about memory and remembering and the music. Because this is, of course, a thing that I just figured out toward the end of my mom's life. I wish I'd known it sooner, all this research coming out about how somehow the musical memory stays more intact.
Oh, that's interesting.
So one of the last times I saw my mom at this nursing home in Montreal, I went in and I waved and she recognized me-ish, you know, and she said, wow, the resemblance is uncanny. And I thought, wow, I wonder who she sees. You know, is it her sister, her daughter, I don't know, herself, her mother? I don't know who she saw. So I just said, yeah, well, of course it is. And there was music playing, and she starts singing this song. I never knew she even knew this song. I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of country-ish song. And I thought, how do you know this song? I've never heard you sing it or play it. And I thought, wow, I wish I'd kind of known that more, then I would have had more music around. And play my guitar more.
And so what's your advice for a good old age?
A good old age. I really believe the key to a good old age is to stay engaged, whatever that means for you, and that'll vary tremendously. So for some people, it will be really becoming involved with grandchildren. For others, it will be fulfilling a bucket list, and who knows what's on that bucket list. For others, it'll be joining a political party or staying involved in a political party and trying to change our politics and trying to change the country. It doesn't really matter, but it has to be something that's meaningful to you. And if you can do that, it might be a continuation of what you've done when you were a younger adult. It might be new engagements that you want to discover yet. But to find things that are meaningful is, I think, really the key.
Yeah, that's very inspiring.
That's kind of the beauty of it, is that's what makes us humans. We're all combined of these stories, and how do we start weaving them together to see our connections? And I think especially in such a divided world right now, it's more and more, how do you find that human connection, regardless of age, regardless of sexual orientation, of so many other different things. Because the only thing that we really know in terms of life stories and in terms of sexuality is that the only normal thing is variety. That's all.